Hello, everyone. Welcome to the LD4 2022 conference session, The Share Family, One Project, Many Tenants. I'm Jim Hahn. I'll be the session facilitator. Before I go ahead and introduce our speakers, I wanted to highlight a few resources of interest to our attendees. You likely, if you've been to other sessions, you've seen these already, but for those of you who are just joining us for today, note our conference website. We have several important links there, including our conference code of conduct. We do have social tagging for the conference, so you can use that hashtag. There is a Slack invite listed there in the chat. You can go ahead and join that if you want to continue the conversation with any of the speakers today. There's a channel for this session. We can also offer technical assistance in a dedicated tech support channel on that Slack. If you also want to look at any of the videos later, we have a YouTube presence for the LD4 conference. So you can find those sessions there later. Most sessions are recorded. Several are live streamed. This particular session is being live streamed, so it should be available more or less immediately at our YouTube space. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'll move into introductions of our speakers. I'll start with Beth. Beth Pignelli-Camden is the Goldstein Director of Information Processing at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries, where she manages technical services operations. She is also engaged with international linked data projects and currently chairs the Share-VDE Advisory Council. Next, Alan. Alan Banskin is the Collections Metadata Standards Manager at the British Library. He has responsibility for development, implementation, and application of bibliographic standards and metadata quality. Abigail Sparling is the Serials Metadata Librarian at the University of Alberta Library, where she focuses on leveraging technology to improve resource description, management, and discovery. And our fourth speaker, Roberto Delegane, is a full professor in medieval history and methodology and history of historiography at Federico II University in Naples. His research interests are in the history of late medieval institutions, cultural history, history of historiography, history and information technology, and digital libraries. Thanks so much, speakers. I will hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Jim. I am sharing my screen here. Thanks, Jim, for the great introductions. And also, I wanted to recognize Anna Leonetti and the team at Share-VDE for their assistance in preparing this slide deck. We're going to talk today about the Share family, one project, many tenants. The outline for this session will be first an introduction to the tenant infrastructure and how the various projects work together. And then we will have brief presentations from several of the tenants so you get some idea of the different flavors of tenants within the Share family. I wanted to start by saying you may know the Share family of linked data initiatives for its flagship project, Share-VDE, which you've seen presentations on at past LD4 conferences as well as in other places. The Share family tenants include not only Share-VDE, but also a number of other tenants, including the Kubicat LOD, the PCC Data Pool, the National Bibliographies Project, and the Share Catalogue Project. So I'm going to start by talking about why the principles and why we move to this kind of architecture. So there are a number of things that I wanted to highlight on this slide, that linking entities is easier than duplicating data. And libraries in the MARC world rely on duplicating data. And I think as we move into linked data, thinking about how we link and reuse is a critical piece of why linked data works better for us. The tenant architecture allows us to cooperate and still maintain autonomy, critical for the different needs of the different projects. And we can distribute the technology load in a way that achieves long-term sustainability. All of the projects are supported on the same LOD platform technology that has been developed for Share-VDE and is used across the projects. The tenants are differentiated by the scope and the domain of what the content is. But there's an added value here of collaboration across the different communities of linked data in libraries. So here's a look at some of the tenants that are currently working. And the tenants are grouped by scope and domain. And I've already mentioned some of these already. I wanted to highlight the two tenants that are on this slide that are not going to have a presentation today. And so I wanted to mention the KubiCat Linked Open Data Project. KubiCat is sometimes known as Share Art. It's a collaboration of art libraries. So their needs are very specific to visual resources. And then the Parsifal Project, which is a network of ecclesiastical university libraries in Rome. Again, a domain that is very specific and has specific needs. So for those of you that are not technologists, and I should mention that I'm presenting this as from a non-technology kind of perspective. So for those of you that are, please forgive any oversimplification because I'm presenting this from a more generalist perspective. So I have here on the screen definitions from Wikipedia about multi-tenancy. And this is a software architecture where a single instance of the software supports multiple tenants. And a tenant is a group of users with specific privileges. And this allows different choices using the same underlying architecture. So what are the benefits? More efficient data management, technological sustainability. And from the user's perspective, this allows each tenant to have richer and specialized sets of resources. So I think having these tenants tailored to the needs of the institutional members of different branches is a really sustainable way, but also having the specialized needs recognized. So the main components of each of the tenants, each has a CKB or cluster knowledge base. In Share-VDE, this is known as Sapientia, but each of the tenants has its own CKB. It also has its own URI registry with a specific namespace, but these are linked together in the overall share index so that we're sharing the URIs across the space. Each has a JCricket cluster knowledge base editor. JCricket is the name of our editor, and this will allow human beings to work in the entity management field. Right now, machine clustering has been the name of the game, but as this tool is developed, we'll be able to edit clusters, merge clusters, divide clusters, so that the entity work has a human element as well as a machine element. Each tenant has its own data store, and most importantly, it has a discovery portal with one or more skins. And later on, when Abigail speaks, you'll see the Share-VDE with the University of Alberta skin. I'm from the University of Pennsylvania, and we also have a Share-VDE with a University of Pennsylvania skin. So this allows a different look and feel on the front end while still sharing the data in the tenant. On this screen, we see a visual of how the tenants are organized. And you can see that each column represents one of the tenants. So on the left, you see the Share-VDE tenant with its multiple skins. You see KubiCat, the National Bibliography, Share Catalogue in the orange, and at the far right, the PCC data pool. All of these tenants have part of the share family index, which is the tan box in the middle. And you can see that each of them have their own URI registry, editor, and CKB. So this is a nice visual for representing how the technology works and how they run in parallel, but are all connected with the share family index. And as the records are clustered from different data sources, they are enriched with external sources such as VIOF, ISME, FAST, etc. The tools for clustering, the tools for enrichment are all part of the shared infrastructure that the multi-tenant approach allows us to have. And this allows us to have a more efficient data management and technological sustainability. So the tools that are shared have one development. And a great example of this is for the QBCat tenant, subject access was a priority for development. And as that is developed for that tenant, and which it has been and released, it'll be added into the other tenants, including Share-VDE, because it is also of importance to the print-based catalogs, the books and resources that are in the Share-VDE tenant. At this point, I'm going to move on into the next phase of the presentation where we explore some of the tenants. And we're going to start with the PCC tenant. For those of you that are not aware, the PCC, or the Program for Cooperative Cataloging, is known for its quality metadata. And you may know it under some of its branches, the BIBCO cataloging branch, CONSERS, which is serials, NACO, which is name authority, and SACO, subject authority. During the LD4P3 grant, known as Closing the Loop, the idea of the PCC data pool was part of that grant. And so the grant members working with the PCC had OCLC, and OCLC supplied us with the MARC records for BIBCO, CONSER, and NACO. And these were transformed by the Share-VDE clustering tools and created the PCC tenant, which is available as linked open data. The PCC has recently made a statement about the openness of their metadata, so this is in line with that statement. You see the link on the screen, and these slides have been shared in the conference site. Here is a screenshot from the PCC data pool. Please note that this is still in beta. It has the PCC branding, but in many ways is very similar to the look and feel of the other tenants. As this is a recent development, the PCC assessment has not been completed yet, but you are willing to look at this and test it out, as the PCC is also testing that out. So at this point, I'm going to wrap up and pass it on to Abigail Sparling, who's going to talk about the University of Alberta.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, so I'm here to talk about the Share-VDE tenant, and I'm going to be doing that from the perspective that we have at the University of Alberta Library. Next slide. And as Beth mentioned, I do just want to note that we are one of many libraries that are part of this tenant. So we're just sharing one perspective today, but we are a large group. At the U of A, we've been active in the international BIBFRAME community and a member of Share-VDE since early 2017. And so for us, what began as an exploratory project to convert our catalog to BIBFRAME has, in the 5 years since then, become an integral part of our strategic planning in the areas of cataloging, metadata, and discovery. So I'm going to briefly outline how the Share-VDE tenant fits and directly contributes to UAL's linked data implementation plan, which we recently released, and how the collaborative approach of Share-VDE more generally has supported our continued engagement in and movement towards linked data implementation. So a really interesting aspect of this work is how the development of Share-VDE has mirrored what we need to support linked data implementation, which is no coincidence. So looking at our linked data trajectory at U of A, experimentation in our cataloging section began in early 2016 with explorations of URIs in MARC and MARC to BIBFRAME conversion. And it was roughly at this time that we heard about the formation of the Share-VDE project, which gave us a new way to collaboratively work with our data and support for kind of like that at-scale conversion and URI enrichment, which helped us take our explorations to the next level. So in this way, a lot of our work on linked data has been tied to the Share-VDE project. After the initial period of experimentation where we worked on use case design and testing of our converted data in the initial portal, the bigger picture began to emerge of what was broadly needed from the Share-VDE tenant for us. And this coincided with the kind of beginning of strategic planning at U of A in terms of endorsing linked data and moving towards linked data. And so at the same time, working with Share-VDE, we could then highlight what our needs were, which was for things such as editors and entity management, clarification of the BIBFRAME data model, the need for discovery of newly converted data, decisions about what sources and IDs and vocabularies we were going to use, and tying it all together with the need for shared practices in this domain. So this then led to the development of what we know the Share-VDE infrastructure is now. So the development of the JCricket editor, the new Share-VDE discovery portal. And this was all done through a number of collaborative working groups and advisory council, which steers and shapes technology development. Next slide. So throughout Share-VDE infrastructure development, U of A has been actively engaged in their working groups, which support, define, and test the integral components of Share-VDE. So that's including groups that refine the data model and entity identification and clustering, use case development for the cluster knowledge base editor, JCricket, which will support the management of entity clusters, as well as use case and testing and mockups for the discovery portal. Involvement in these working groups has ensured that our use cases and requirements are accounted for in the development process, and that Share-VDE continues to support our movement towards linked data implementation. Next slide. So this brings us to UAL's recently launched linked data implementation plan. And this is kind of a living document that outlines our strategic commitments to linked data, as well as concrete steps and projects that we're committed to that are going to enable us to implement linked data technologies. And so this plan is underpinned by a few overarching principles that are going to support better discovery and access to our data and collections. So the first is that it acknowledges that we're going to implement linked data as and where it makes sense to do so to achieve those goals. But the other two things is that we're going to continue to position our activities in relation to open initiatives and the ability to openly share our data, as well as that we, in implementing linked data, are looking to participate in existing initiatives. So, partnering with the community and aligning and improving our practices with others so that we're not doing this work in a silo. Next slide. So, there we go. So building off our linked data visioning document, the implementation plan focuses on outlining those key projects and objectives, timelines, and milestones that are going to support us in moving towards implementation on a 5-year timeline. So it's meant to be pragmatic and outline kind of the steps and stages. And so at our library, initiatives fall into 5 thematic areas, which focus on operationalizing linked data. And so within the context of our cataloging unit specifically, these focus on operationalizing BIBFRAME and developing connections between existing and emerging systems to support resource description, discovery, as well as management. Next slide. So as I noted, the implementation plan really focuses on partnerships and collaborations and how we can contribute to and benefit from them as we move towards a linked data first environment. And so it does in this way depend on widely shared and adopted infrastructure for processes and workflows, many of which are going to be new for our environment. And so a benefit of working with Share-VDE is the broad engagement with the wider library community to support interchange and collaboration. In particular, the engagement with LC, PCC, and LD4, all of whom U of A is actively engaged in or reliant on in varying capacities. Of course, we are not alone in these commitments among Share-VDE members, so the connections are also essential for others. Next slide. So U of A recently signed a 5-year memorandum of understanding for continued participation with Share-VDE to directly support our linked data implementation plan. Our partnership with Share-VDE and their systems is really integral to a number of our initiatives and requirements in support of implementation, including data conversion and enrichment, entity management, discovery, and continued work with PCC in a BIBFRAME environment. Next slide. So looking at a visual representation of our linked data implementation plan, kind of 3-year infrastructure goal, here highlights the importance of the Share-VDE infrastructure to that plan. And I have those kind of called out in those black bubbles. In our 3-year timeline, we expect a hybrid environment, combining a mix of tools and data sources. Importantly, what we need is to retain some MARC-based infrastructure with supporting BIBFRAME cataloging tools, conversion, management, and discovery tools. Next slide. Maybe more importantly, this high-level diagram here attempts to capture key connectors for data going to current systems, going to new and current systems by the end of that 3-year infrastructure goal. So here you'll see we have a BIBFRAME-based cataloging editor, Sinopia, entity management tool in JCricket, data source and discovery tool in the Sapientia cluster knowledge base and Share-VDE discovery portal, and ways to connect to our MARC-based systems. So this means that we can kind of look forward to changing original and copy cataloging workflows to Sinopia while still populating our CIRCE MARC dataset and contributing to the PCC. Next slide. At the 5-year mark, the plan is for our own systems to be linked data native. But by then, we're still going to need to consider that, while we will be working in BIBFRAME, many others are still going to be using MARC. So we want to be able to use those descriptions for copy, cataloging, and reuse. There are many things described in MARC, and we don't anticipate an influx of staff cataloging resources to be able to catalog everything originally in BIBFRAME. So we need to continue to accommodate work for a hybrid environment, which for us is going to be supported by Share-VDE conversion. So they're a really important aspect of our 5-year plan. Next slide. So coming back to the present, the Share-VDE portal launch is on the horizon. So in terms of what we're doing or what our plans are for on the ground is we're going to be focusing on getting our instance set up and performing further analysis and user testing on the Share-VDE components and how they work with our system. So working towards production. It's been a really fascinating path to get here, and we're seeing everything come together. And that's kind of the U of A Share-VDE perspective. So I'll pass it on.
Thanks, Abigail. Alan is up next.
Sorry,
Alan?
I was muted. I just realized. Yeah, I've switched my camera off because I was getting a warning about an unstable network. But hopefully things will hold out until I finish. So I'm going to talk about the British National Bibliography, which will be the first member of the National Bibliography tenant within the Share family. And So next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of background, the British National Bibliography, usually known as BNB, lists books and journals that have been published or distributed in the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland since 1950, and it has included electronic publications since 2013. It also includes cataloguing and publication information for forthcoming publications. It's used for a variety of purposes, but most particularly it's used for collection development, research, and copy cataloguing. Next slide, please. So the British National Bibliography started in 1950, and it's adapted to new technologies as they've emerged. It started obviously as a print product. In fact, it started being printed on just one side of the paper so that the entries could be cut out and pasted onto cards. So it's an early example of cut and paste. That didn't work very well because the cards just buckled. So they eventually introduced a card service in 1956. Subsequently, it has moved into electronic format, UKMarc exchange tapes, more recently Mark 21 exchange tapes. There was an online service called Blaze from the British Library from 1977 onwards. The British National Bibliography existed on CD-ROM in the 1990s. FTP is still there, and we have a web presence. We have Z3950 access, and the weekly lists are also published as PDF as well as in exchange tapes. On the web. And from 2011, we began to experiment with linked open data. And obviously now we're moving into the Share family. So I will, on the next slide, I'll say a little bit about our background in linked open data. Next slide, please. So, as I said, we began thinking about linked data in 2010. And the idea was to make the British National Bibliography available as linked open data, partly for our own benefit to learn more about that and to develop workflows and production processes. We chose the National Bibliography because it's a data set that's well curated and it's under our control. We publish it, so we had obviously the authority to make it available. We're not developers. We work in the I work in the collection metadata department. We're not technologists or developers, really, mostly catalogers with an interest in technology. So we worked to develop our linked open data service in conjunction with Thales, who were very involved in that technology at the time. The project was launched in 2011. With Thales initially being the host, and then we moved to TSO a few years later. We've reached a point probably about 2 or 3 years ago when we realized that there wasn't really an affordable path for future development of this particular application of linked open data. We created a data model in conjunction with Thales. The data model was still relatively flat, but it did link out to various vocabularies and other sources, and it's documented on our website. So can we move to the next slide, please? So we decided that Share-VDE looked like a good choice for carrying on our linked data offering. And so we've joined the Share family. And the reasons why are, well, it's affordable. we can afford it from our budget. We can benefit and contribute to collaborative development of the tool. The tool's obviously got, or the set of tools has a cultural heritage focus. The data model is entified so that it's compatible with the standards, RDA, etc., that we're working with. We're particularly interested in that, although it's derived from BIBFRAME, it's also aligning with library reference model in the RDA to create a model that acts as a kind of bridge between BIBFRAME and RDA. There was a user interface and APIs are to be developed, and there are it will allow us to link out to our metadata for the national bibliography to other sources of metadata, and obviously within the tenancy, various national bibliographies will come together, and hopefully we will see some benefits from that conjunction. And it provides us with a development path, as I said, for the national bibliography, and in future we would hope to add our catalogue data into the service as well. So essentially the share tenancy or the share family satisfied a wish list that we'd created when we were thinking about linked data several years ago, actually. So I think this slide dates from about 2015. Next slide, please. So I can show you what the British Library's skin looks like. Well, this is the skin for the British National Bibliography. So you can see that it's got our own branding on it. And we've got really links from this page back to the British Library's site, where you can actually search the British Library's version of the National Bibliography on our Primo system. Or you can learn more by about the National Bibliography and about the share technology by clicking on the Learn More button. And it offers a fairly standard search screen with a suggested search and the ability to filter for publications, original works, people and organizations, and then to filter your results by language, year and type. This is, as I think Beth mentioned earlier, about another skin. This is a beta version, and it's not actually been made public yet. This is a preview of the beta version, but we will be aiming to launch it fairly soon. I can't quite give a date yet, but it should be very soon. If we go into the next slide, please. So this is what happens if you press the Learn More button. It tells you a little bit about the British National Bibliography and gives you a link to relevant information. There's also a summary of data in the National Bibliography tenancy, which you can see at the bottom there. And there's information about share, family, etc., and the BIBFRAME in the panel on the left. Next slide, please. So if you search for a person such as Andrea Levy, this is the result that you will get. You can see that we've got a link to data drawn from Wikipedia. There are options to look at other related sites, including Library of Congress, for example, Bibliothèque Nationale. And then you can look for original works by Andrea Levy. There's a list of the works by Andrea Levy and you can look for the publications or works about Andrea Levy. Next slide, please. So these are the search results for the original works by Andrea Levy. One of the things that we noticed is that it's quite a useful way of identifying cataloging errors in our data. We've got a couple of things here where things haven't clustered correctly because of errors in the data. So we can fix those, and they will cluster correctly, but I left them in deliberately so that you could see this function. If you click on one of the titles in this list, then it will bring up a list of instances, which we can see on the next slide. And so here we have the fruit of the lemon. And this was, I think this was the position when I did this screenshot, which was about a week ago. And I think since then, there's been an update, and there's now some ebooks showing up as well. However, at the time that I did this, there were only 3 results. And you can see that we've got certain attributes listed there in the columns. Next slide, please. And if you drill down to look at one of the instances, this is the kind of information that you get about it. At the top, it tells you it's a volume and it was published in English in Leicester by Charnwood. That's not a phrase that appears in our bibliographic data anywhere. That's something that's generated from the metadata. Also, the terminology in this will change slightly between published resources and cataloging and publications. So forthcoming publications will say to be published or something like that. I can't remember the exact wording, but they will be clearly identified as being different from things that have already been published. And that was one of the things that we felt was important to incorporate into the National Bibliography's tenancy. Next slide, please. So from our perspective, the benefits of being a member of the Share family or the collaborative development path, this access to a state-of-the-art technology stack, the ability to identify and cluster our MARC data, and then another channel for dissemination of our data, probably in conjunction with other national bibliographies. And of course, the aggregation of data with British Library's data. So that concludes my presentation. So I can hand over to Roberto, I think it is next.
Thank you. Thank you. I am going to speak about Share Catalogue. The Share Catalogue project took its first steps in 2015 on the occasion of an agreement between several universities in southern Italy. These universities agreed to share a range of resources and services, starting from on-site library services for their institutional users to a federated search system to access information on physical and digital resources, common platforms for digital publishing in open access, and a linked open data collective catalog. The various initiatives were therefore part of a broader program to promote open science. Next slide, please. Sorry, next one. By the end of 2017, we started to thinking of ways to evolve a Share Catalogue especially in terms of interlinking with other sources. So we choose to integrate share catalog identifiers into Wikidata through the creation of specific property, of course, after the Wikidata community approval. Next slide, please. Why Wikidata? From a technological perspective, we have chosen Wikidata because of the richness of its data, not strictly bibliographical, often enhanced by context information and verifiable sources. Associating the share catalog identifiers with the Wikidata items was a fairly simple task, but it has yielded great benefits, especially now that we are working on the technical transition to version 2.0 of the linked open data platform, the one that Share-VDE is adopting. Next slide, please. In 2021, the share catalog staff began to work at this technical transition, and to achieve this goal, we had participated with 2 of our representatives in the advisory council of Share-VDE as a liaison for the share family of the project. So we have set 3 basic activities that, in our opinion, will be useful to guarantee a good quality of the technical shift. To elaborate the updated conversion specifications of UNIMARC for BIBFRAME 2.0, as UNIMARC is the basis for most of the integrated library systems used in our consortium. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The first task required a working group of metadata librarians from universities involved in the project. It has been a rather tortuous task, but we are almost at the end and will soon check the results to better calibrate the choices made. Considering the difference in the information processing between UNIMARC Mark 21 and their conversion to BIBFRAME, we assessed together with Ethical that this task would not simply be entrusted to an automatic mapping process. Next slide, please. The second task is a quality assessment activity of the cluster knowledge base. And here the share catalog Wikidata work was crucial because of the updated reports for database violations that Wikidata provides in relation to duplicate clusters. While in the case of unique value violations, this may depend on poor automatic association through Wikidata's mix and match gadgets, or in the worst scenario, on a conflation. Single value violations depend mainly on incorrect duplication in the cluster knowledge base. Next slide, please. Thanks to the Wikidata always up-to-date reports, we can act locally in the UNIMARC bibliographic and authority files to resolve duplications. So when we load the updates, the clustering process acts in 2 different ways, depending on the corrections made, either by invalidating the erroneously duplicated clusters or by generating a redirect to the URI representing the agent in all accepted forms. This whole process may seem laborious, but actually it allows us to properly calibrate the clusterization module. And in the near future, we hope it will give us a clear view of the possible cases we will have to deal with when the cluster knowledge base editor will be fully up and running. Next slide, please. Another topic that we are strongly analyzing is the inclusion of other authority services through publicly available dumps or APIs, or through interlinking provided by Wikidata. We are evaluating, among others, EDREF, the authority database of French academic and research libraries, a very reliable and complete source. Consider that EDREF is present in more than 80% of the entities in Wikidata with a share catalog ID. Next slide, please. Starting with the activities that I have presented briefly, we have made a small step towards the 2.0 Share-VDE technology, a process that we believe will greatly benefit our research community. To conclude, we will continue our journey with these and other specific problems for a new phase of share catalog, a new phase that will also very closely affect the work on Wikidata, simply because Wikidata represents such an awesome tool for enrichment of our data. Thank you. I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody on the panel, Roberto, Alan, and Abigail. We now have time for some discussion and questions from the audience. So if you have questions for any of the speakers or for all the speakers, please use the chat feature. I'm going to start off by asking everybody about when did your institution first get involved in the Share family, and what's your personal involvement like?
I can go. I covered this a little bit in our presentation, but we became officially involved, I believe, in March 2017. I joined the U of A in August 2017. So I have been, like Share-VDE was one of the kind of my introduction to linked data, and I've been quite involved since we started. So originally, I was part of the Transformation Council, which preceded our now Advisory Council, which looked at the MARC to BIBFRAME conversion and helped to refine it. And then I've also been on the Cluster Knowledge Base Editor Working Group, which looks at like actually defining and designing what that cluster knowledge base editor is going to look like. So going through the use cases with the designer, as well as a little bit of that on the discovery side as well.
Thanks. Roberto or Alan?
Yes, I can say that. Well, we're aware of Share-VDE for some time before we became members of the family. We had attended presentations by Tiziana Posamato and others about the technology. It was very interesting to us. And then we actually began discussions about towards the end of 2019 and joined the following year.
I have already said something about this. We started to be involved in this project in 2015, even if we started to talk about this with Tiziana Posamato, I think in 2013, and the share catalog was part, as I have already said, of a wider project focusing on on open science. So we wanted to, our libraries were all and are all very involved in promoting open science. And of course, we wanted also have a catalog in open linked data. So to use within our libraries open standards. And I have been the coordinator of the project from the very beginning. This is why I'm involved in this project. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberta. I'll say a little bit about my involvement. When Share-VDE was starting its pilot project in 2016, I made the case for Penn to be involved. And at the time, I knew very little about linked data, but I was excited to learn. So I saw this as an opportunity to be engaged and learn about linked data. I was not part of the Transformation Council. And I felt like during that pilot project, we didn't have the resources to do the assessment of the original clustering that many of the other participants did. As the project evolved and we moved into the 1.0 version of it, I became engaged with both the advisory council, which I chair now, and also the UX UI group that was looking at what is needed in the front-end interface, working with Philip from Samhang on design and his design questions. And I think that my personal benefit is that first, the learning element of being part of understanding how linked data works and being part of the decision-making process for how we want Share-VDE to represent linked data and the changes that we need. And then a critical part of this for me was the engagement with the international community and understanding how the sources of data were different and the needs were different. And I think that relating back to the topic of this presentation, the development of the multi-tenancy approach really addresses this need, the understanding that needs are different, and yet we can still have the benefits of development across all of these different needs rather than treating each one as an individual one-off project. So I think there's so much benefit in cost savings with this approach to development. But there's the personal engagement with this community that is so international, and learning so much from the contributions across the world has been very important as a personal learning thing for me. I see that we have a few things in chat. We have a number of links that have been shared. Thank you so much, Jim, for including those links in the chat so that the audience can explore some of the beta projects that are available. Oh, I want to go advance one more screen to share with you the final slide on this slide deck. And this has been uploaded to the conference site. So if you want to explore any more about the Share family and past presentations, these are all available. There is a wiki with information. And of course, there's the various beta versions of the discovery interface that are available to explore. So we have a question in the chat. The question from Dave Rezer is, I imagine most of you have experience with MARC to BIBFRAME mapping conversion. Are you also doing BIBFRAME to MARC conversion for use in your traditional ILSs and sharing with MARC record partners?
So for us, I mean, in terms of the Share-VDE context, there right now is not that need because you're always starting from MARC data. So the focus for Share-VDE has been the MARC to BIBFRAME conversion. But certainly, you know, kind of looking at that full ecosystem, at least from our perspective, you know, we have been looking at BIBFRAME back to MARC conversion. I sit on the PCC group that's looking at MARC simplification for conversion from BIBFRAME. So it's certainly a thing that the community as a whole and many of the members of Share-VDE being part of that broader community are thinking about in terms of the need to still use MARC and our ILS for the near future.
Yeah, we're not working with BIBFRAME. We're still working with MARC, so we're sending the MARC data to Share-VDE where it's being transformed.
Roberta, have you done anything with the BIBFRAME to MARC conversion?
Well, no, we are not yet, so to say, working to the reverse, so to say, mapping to go back to UNIMARC from BIBFRAME. We are very busy to make it work in the opposite direction. So. And no, I don't think that we think to realize something that will go back to UNIMARC. I hope this is the way to leave UNIMARC slowly, of course, but at the right point. Then we will be very happy to work together with our colleagues of our university, of the Share family, so to say, to realize something that goes to other MARC formats, the one that is actually more used all around the world.
I see a note from Tiziana Passamento that this conversion from BIBFRAME to MARC is on the Share family roadmap and it's scheduled to be finalized in the next development period. And she says this is a very important step. And I don't have much to add to what was said already. Penn is also participating in the PCC committee that Abigail mentioned, and thinking about it in a sort of theoretical way that so many of our library functions are records-based. So circulation, ordering, and that kind of a thing where I don't know that we'll always need a MARC record. We probably will need something to hang those functions off of in our local systems. But perhaps if, as we develop more the linked data discovery, we can rely on a much simpler record that could handle those functions in the local system. I think one of the findings that, as we've discussed this, MARC to BIBFRAME, BIBFRAME to MARC, is that we recognize that round tripping is not possible, that the change, the difference between them does not make that round trip a valid idea, but we still have the need for that transition from BIBFRAME to MARC, but it's a different MARC, I think. Well, I see we're getting close to our time. Any last thoughts from the panel? Any additional questions? One question from the audience. Right. Thank you, Alan, Roberto, and Abigail. Really appreciate your thoughts on this panel.
Yes, thanks. Thanks to our speakers and thanks everyone for your questions. Feel free to continue the conversation on Slack. There's a channel dedicated to this session. So if you have additional follow-up questions or you want to continue this, feel free to use Slack.